Welcome to the International Symposium on Alternatives Assessment Virtual 2020 Symposium on Current Practices and Future Prospects. My name is Joel Tickner. I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell and executive director of the A4, or the Association for the Advancement of Alternatives Assessment. For those of you new to the A4 is a professional society dedicated to advancing the practice, theory and practice of alternatives assessment. We welcome you to join our growing community and diverse community of experts and professionals from a number of disciplines. The information about this session will be posted on our website, www.saferalternatives.org. There are going to be session resources and other materials there, including the speaker bios. I would like to thank our sponsors again for their generous support of us over the last many years, and of course of this symposium, including the Washington State Department of Ecology, the Oregon State Department of Environmental Quality, the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, the Angus Chemical Company, Tox Services, and Seventh Generation. So today's session, again, is the second part of our industry session on lessons learned from small businesses in adopting safer alternatives. You can go to the next slide, please. And here to facilitate the session, who is just an amazing expert and supporter of the A4 and capacity building and working with industry, Pam Eliason from the Massachusetts Toxic Use Reduction Institute, who brings a wealth of experience and knowledge on helping small and medium-sized companies adopt safer chemicals. So Pam, thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Joel. That was awfully sweet. Hi to everybody. I can't see you all on my screen at one moment, but really happy to be able to do this, and particularly to be talking about what it takes to work with very small businesses to help them in shifting towards using safer chemicals. And so this is going to be a wonderful session in that we're going to hear from some of these small businesses about their experiences, and we're going to hear from some of the technical assistance providers who really worked with them about their reflections on what they've heard from the companies and what they've learned over the years of doing this kind of work. So this is going to be very focused on pragmatic approaches and really better understanding what are the implications of making a change towards using safer chemicals for very small businesses. As practitioners, we have to really think it through more. We are working with companies who have much smaller staffs. We're not talking about small and medium-sized enterprises. We're talking about very small businesses with a handful of employees, all of whom have a lot of different jobs and wear many hats over the course of every single day. So working with this kind of a business to help them to make change towards using safer chemicals is a very different approach than it would be with a multinational corporation. I was not able to join yesterday, but I'm sure what you heard there is going to be very different from what we're going to be hearing today. I did have the opportunity to attend this morning, and we were talking a lot about trade-offs. And I think when we think about the very small businesses, the trade-offs, the issue of trade-offs is even more critical to think through and to engage the company with, to understand where those little points in time might exist that could make or break a project. So it's a different approach for a practitioner or a technical assistance provider. And it's a very different process and a different experience for the business itself. And so I'm really excited to be able to introduce our three business owners who are going to be talking about their experience. So we're going to first hear from Adam Pearson, who owns Merrimack Ales here in Lowell, Massachusetts. Then we're going to be talking to Scott Sung, who's part of the Family Dry Cleaners family, talking about their experience. And both Family Dry Cleaners and Burien Auto Rebuild are in King County. So we're going to wrap it up by hearing just briefly from Jamie De Los Santos about his experience, what your business is and what your experience has been. And then we'll have a broader panel discussion, as I said. So Adam, I'd love to start with you. And if I could ask each of you to introduce yourself, kind of familiarize us with your business. What are you doing? And then what chemicals are you using and why? And what was the experience of wanting to change and moving towards change for you?
Thanks, Pam. So yeah, it's a great picture of me. I'm Adam Pearson, everybody. I run a small brewery here in Lowell, Massachusetts. And as you can see in the photo, a lot of what we deal with is hot and harsh. That's really where I think our involvement with Turi came about. As I got the brewery going, my background is in engineering, and I've worked with some pretty nasty chemical processes in the past. So one of the things that was top of mind for me getting this thing going was, as Pam noted, we're a really small business. The fella in the yellow shirt there was my old brewer, and I don't want anybody getting injured. This is a great slide to look at for that. Some of the things that we have to clean are pretty nasty. As you can see in the middle there, it's a dried on mixture of yeast and other proteins. So in order to attack it, you have to have a hot solution of detergent. And the unfortunate part of that is sometimes, as you can see the guy's ankle there on the right-hand side, that's the result of a hot chemical burn. The young man who posted that photo the other day said that that's 3 months into already healing. And I had seen some that were a lot worse. When we began, I got a call one day from Pam and from her associate Joy Onash, who introduced themselves and told me that this resource was available. And I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic, because there's somebody who knows more about this than I do. So we've worked with them over the last few years to identify environmentally sound cleaning processes for the brewery that are safe for the employees. The traditional process for cleaning involves sodium hydroxide or caustic, typically around 180 degrees. And so that does the washing. And then after that, because it's an extremely basic solution, the traditional approach is to then rinse that or neutralize it with an acid, which is a mix of nitric and phosphoric. None of that is great to be around. So what we investigated were alternate cleaners or detergents, as well as sanitizers afterwards. And you can see an example here on the slide, some brew tabs or chlorine-based sanitizers that we arrived at as being very, very good. So that's kind of our journey. Added a lot more testing to what we're doing, gave us much more ability to ensure that we're providing a safe product for our customers, while at the same time keeping our team safe as well. So thanks.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so that image of the injury, I think really drives home a big part of your motivation, which is keeping your workers safe.
Yep.
Yep. And then, of course, making sure that your equipment is fully sanitized and cleaned so that you don't impart any kind of issue on your product or your consumers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Wonderful. So I'd like to turn now to Scott Song from Family Dry Cleaners. And if you could share a bit of your story, what your business is, what your chemical use is, what motivated you to change, and how did you go about it?
Hello, everyone. Currently, I own a small business in King County, Washington, in the city of Redmond. Right now, as of now, we were previously using perchloroethylene, which is known as PERC, is a common solvent used in the cleaning process. It is extremely hazardous. So when my local county approached me, which is King County, and the Department of Hazardous Waste Management program approached me that there were safer alternatives and more environmentally friendly alternatives to transition to rather than using PERC. It was a program that immediately caught my attention. For workspace, it became more agreeable for a work environment, which results in better productivity due to peace of mind that it's a safe work environment. Some of the hurdles that I encountered through this transition would be adequate funding, proper investigation for vendors for transitions. It was quite a bit hard to figure out vendors for the transitioning into wet cleaning process. And it was a great benefit for transitioning into a safer alternative, because for essentially the community around us and customer base as well, just to notify them that all solvents and spotting agents and soaps are environmentally friendly for them as well. And that is about it. I probably skipped over a few points here. If there's anything that you further need to know, Pam, about business as well.
Yeah, no, thanks. So you're a dry cleaner in a community where I assume you have a lot of neighbors, and so making a change from using PERC, which is a carcinogen, to something that is safer was what you did, and that's a wonderful thing. And you worked really closely with the folks from King County to make that happen. How many employees do you have in your facility, Scott?
We're currently a very small business, and we only have one employee at the establishment, so it's not a big operation indeed, but it definitely makes a difference for the small business and the community around us, with schools and offices and just the environment generally itself.
Sure, sure. And Adam, I didn't ask you that question. So you have just one person besides yourself in the office, in the brewery, is that correct?
There's myself. I've got a full-time brewer assistant, and then that's it for the production floor. We've got a handful of bartenders.
Great, great. So yes, as I say, very, very small business. So good, thank you, Scott and Adam, thanks. So Jamie, if we could just turn to you and just hear a bit about what your business is, what your workplace is like, what the chemical you're using was, and what you changed to. Thanks.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jamie, and I'm the owner of Beer and Auto Rebuild. It's actually my cousin and I that are partners. She works in the office and takes care of the front, and I take care of the back. We also have 2 employees that are bodymen that do all the body work. I'm the painter. And so we were in Seattle for about almost 20 years. And when we moved and bought this business in Burien, Washington, it's a lot smaller. Fortunately, we were able to bring a lot of our customers, and insurance companies with us. So the work has been in these times, at least something's there. But prior to moving, we were using solvent-based materials, especially with the base coats, like you can see the panel on the picture. And it was very much, the odor was very strong, and dealing with the smells in this smaller business of ours and the workspace that we have, it was so nice to be able to make the conversion over to waterborne paint. For the smell, for one, definitely. There's a lot more benefits to waterborne paint than the solvent paint. Here in Washington, we aren't like California where they were required to use waterborne materials. So we were one of the first in not one of the first, I should say, but to make that conversion over, with the help of King County as well, because that was one of our big obstacles too, were to retrofit everything, to make it happen and possible. King County had a program through our supplier Exalta, who we use for our product, had told us about King County's program, which was awesome. I mean, without that, I think it definitely would have been a lot harder to accomplish what we did in the matter of time we did. But I mean, as far as like compared to before, the smells were so strong that our customers, they would even say that, would talk about it. And it's just something that we couldn't, prior couldn't really help. And we tried the best we could, but now it's been awesome because none of those smells exist. And it's just been really a positive change, definitely. I think that's pretty much, our transition and our story.
That's great. And so you have your cousin in the front, you in the back, and I assume you have some other markers in the back as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how
Yeah,
many?
we have two other bodymen that do all the body work, and I do all the paint work. So it's a small crew. We due to the COVID, we did have to lay off a few people, that and pick up the slack. So unfortunately, that happened. But we're pretty optimistic that things will come back soon, and we'll be able to hire them back and ramp things up and get things going.
Great. So Scott and Adam, if you wouldn't mind sharing your video now, I'd like to just kind of talk to each of you a bit more, and I'll be certainly inviting King County and Turi to kind of talk a little bit about your experience. Thanks for managing that, Molly. That's great. It's wonderful. Now I'm just talking to the three of you. And thank you, Jen, for starting to ask some questions in the chat. I certainly encourage everybody to do that as we go. So let me just reiterate. So we heard from Adam, you were looking at a traditional clean in place process that used a heated caustic and an acid to clean and sanitize your equipment. And were there any other chemicals that were involved that you wanted to look at?
I mean, that was the traditional or like the baseline for the whole industry. And right. Honestly, with my background, I just wanted to get away from it. I knew there was going to be something better and safer out there. And then after meeting all of you folks, obviously there was an environmental side to it, finding things that would break down and be safer to put down the drain. But that was the big thrust.
Right. Thanks. So Scott, you mentioned PERC. So you were using a traditional dry cleaning solvent for chlorethylene. And can you describe again what it was that you switched to?
So currently, King County funded through the grant program, which is a wet cleaning, which essentially is hydro cleaning with additional soaps and solvents that help break down proteins in your garments, any kind of spots. So it's a lot safer alternative than perchloroethylene PERC, which is, as Pam referred to, as a carcinogen, and that is very hazardous to the environment and to customers as well. So
right. And Jamie, you moved from a solvent-based paint to a water-based paint. And I think this is a question for each of you. I imagine that the performance of the alternative is very important to your ability to make that change. Jamie, what was your experience with the performance of your new system?
Definitely better. There's a lot of advantages that I noticed right away, which was one was the color, more vibrancy, and less materials. The waterborne takes less materials to put on as far as the paint's concerned because of the coverage. Again, the smell was huge, and the waste. You know, it's less waste because we reuse the paint that we didn't use as ground coats for other projects and other cars. So there's a lot less waste involved as well. So it's been awesome.
So actually, you've had enhanced performance has been your
Definitely,
experience.
definitely.
That's amazing. That's
Mhm.
terrific. How about Scott, with switching from a solvent-based fabric, textile cleaning process to a water-based textile cleaning process? What was the performance like, and how did that work for you?
So it really depends on the garment material. So if you're working with silk, wool, anything that is more prone to shrinkage or just integrity of the garments could be compromised through the wet clean process rather than the perk process, because essentially perk just breaks down any kind of oils or any basically anything oil based that can just be subsequently treated through the process of perk. But with wet cleaning, you are dealing with a little shrinkage, so just integrity of the clothing and garments as well. So additional equipment is needed. So that would be one thing. And I'm sorry, what was this second part of the question? I'm sorry, Pam.
No, that's okay. So the performance really,
Mhm.
In order to maintain the performance that your customers expect,
Mhm.
You had to not just switch from solvent to aqueous, but you had to add additional equipment.
Yes, it is preferred, but it really depends on the process of how you take it out from the wet cleaning machine and drying as well. And essentially comes down to how you iron up the clothes as well, because if you're not very skilled with that aspect as well, some additional equipment is needed as well. They recommend.
Yep. But in general, other
Mhm.
than in general, have you been able to get to the performance that your customers demand?
Yes.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
Adam, how about you? Performance-wise, how's it going? What were some of the things that kind of you ran into that you learned moving forward?
For us, honestly, a lot of it's transparent to the customer, because if we do our job right, the tanks are clean and they get the product that they're expecting.
Mhm.
One area that we did run into this with was on the sanitizer side of it. After we clean things, it's great. We've removed surface debris or dirt, but microorganisms can still get there, and spoilage in beer is not something that anybody gets real happy about.
Right.
So one of the most effective sanitizers we looked at was chlorine based. And another thing people don't get excited about is a beer that tastes like bleach. So we had some concerns there, and it was great working with everybody as far as figuring out how to test chlorine threshold and monitor that, so that we were able to run through a series of basically experimental runs with these cleaners and sanitizers to ensure that we weren't going to have any odor or any flavor impact. It's worked out real well. And then about 2 years ago, our whole industry got hit with a new type of yeast that was causing some problems. So we kind of went back to the drawing board and looked at the sanitizers again that would have better effectiveness at ensuring that we didn't get any contamination from that type of yeast. So we haven't had any complaints from the front lines, so that's a good thing.
The front lines meaning we beer drinkers.
Yes, indeed.
Got it. So the sanitizer that you went to, you mentioned that it's chlorine based. Now that's the brew tabs?
Yeah, the brew tabs.
Mhm.
I'm looking at a chat question that just came up. One of the sanitizers we are looking at right now and using because of the diastaticus yeast is peroxyacetic acid. So not only is it acidic, it's a really strong oxidizer. It's kind of a scorched earth sort of sanitizer. And it breaks down very nicely into water, oxygen, and acetic acid. So we use both of those sanitizers in different applications.
Wow, yeah.
And
Um,
Pam, I do see a query from Jen about marketing as well to our customers, that the
Yeah.
transition to green as well. So if I can just address her question about that.
Terrific.
So I would say marketing potential to customers have is amazing as well, because now they have a conscious decision to come to an establishment that offers eco-friendly soap, solvents, and spotting agents that are non-toxic and non-harmful to the environment or the community. And basically how we let that be known as well is signage and digital marketing portals were updated after the transition was made to reflect the establishment has transitioned into eco-friendly products as well for, you know, the health and safety of the community as well.
That's great. So what about Jamie, you and Adam, have you marketed a safer product or process to your customers?
That's a good question. I think my cousin has put it on our website, and we definitely notify our customers. We have signs in the front in our office actually that, you know, state what product that we use. So, but I'm pretty sure she does explain it in the our website.
Mhm. Good. How about you, Adam?
We did maybe a slightly different way, but because we've worked with you guys over the last 5 years with a number of tour groups and whatnot, we got a lot of questions early on, like, well, who are those folks? What's going on? And it offered us the opportunity to have that dialogue with our customers coming into the brewery to explain the work that we were doing. And I think maybe it's just the area where we live, but there are a lot of, I guess, science-minded folks, and we got some pretty deep questions that I think made a nice impact, put us in a good light with a lot of the customers.
That's great. That's great. I know that sometimes we hear from business that they don't want to make a big deal about changing to a safer product because it implies that they were using a less safe chemical or, you know, in their process. So it doesn't sound to me like any of you have had that experience or that concern. Has that ever crossed your mind? Adam, were you concerned, you know, that, you know, people would say, oh, were you using something really hazardous before?
Oh yeah, and I mean, every single time, right? So we make beers, obviously. Some are supposed to be sour and are, some are not supposed to be sour, and we work real hard to make sure that happens. But we also have a side gig where we produce cold brew coffee, and different process, different concerns, different taste and aroma thresholds. So yeah, everything that we work with, it's like, okay, is this better? And if the answer is better, well, which direction? Is it just it's more aggressive, or how is it for us as employees? And yeah, I see some of the questions that are coming up around the use of like peroxy or peracetic acid. And the reality of it is, yeah, it may not be perfect, but if it's what is best in the marketplace right now, as far as doing the job, we have to look at that. That's why I'm happy that we have like the brew tabs and the chlorine based stuff, because it gives us an alternate.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So you have a more dynamic issue, right? Where you have a new contaminant showing up in the industry that you hadn't necessarily had to deal with before. And so having a suite of solutions is probably really helpful for you.
Yeah, it is. And like, just see a question from Saskia that came up. Yeah, early on, I think where we started was ECA, or electrochemical activation. And the sanitizer side of it was hypochlorous acid. Remarkably effective. But when we worked with the first company, they were trying to scale and produce equipment for small breweries like ours. And honestly, they weren't real effective at that. So their equipment was way out of budgetary reach. And that led us through a series of trials where we did end up with the brew tabs. At one point, we were looking at the foggers that they used to sanitize subway cars. And we had to try to figure out how to make the fog work, and it just didn't. And for us, the alloys that our tanks are made out of typically are either 304 or stainless, or 316 stainless. And 304 is susceptible to chlorine corrosion. So not an immediate thing, but over time you're going to develop pinholes, typically in the welds, where either beer shoots out the side of the tank, or maybe not great, you get an exchange of glycol refrigerant with product. And we absolutely had to avoid that. So that steered us away from some of the chlorine products.
What were some of the tricks, Jamie, that you had to figure out when you were making the switch from solvent-based to water-based painting? It's a different process, I assume. Your workers probably had to pay attention to different things. So just as Adam described, discovering that you had the potential for affecting the tank integrity, were there any unexpected hurdles that you or your employees had to figure out as you were working towards making this change? Yeah, you're
not necessarily. The transition was actually quite easy. It was the way the process was a little different with drying and curing and stuff like that, but it was fairly simple. I mean, we still have to use a urethane based clear coat, so we haven't really gone to totally eliminating all the solvents from the industry. I mean, as far as right now, they are using and coming up with new things every day. But as far as like the transition, I would say the biggest hurdle was the drying process, with wet, blowing to cure the paint, to make it a little faster, and the cycle times actually kind of improved, instead of you have to kick up the heat and cure the solvent paints. With the waterborne paints, it's more it's faster cured by blowing, like by blowers. So there's, again, those are the benefits of that product. But in essence, as far as like noticing any huge amount of change, other than a lot of good things, yeah, it hasn't been difficult.
Good. I want to touch on those good things in a minute, but first, new things come up, and so I wonder, Scott, in your experience, with just one employee and making a change that required additional equipment, I assume that there was additional training required as well. Can you talk a bit about how that went, and did you learn, what did you learn during that process with respect to how best to get your employees up to speed with a whole new technique?
For the new apparatuses that were put into the store, it does take a little bit of time to adjust to the equipment, but essentially most people in the industry are familiar with the equipment that need to be additionally put on premise for doing the work. So training and such is all done basically through my experience. So it's just teaching them how to work the new equipment, and most of the people who are employed at the shop are familiar with the equipment. So it's nothing new essentially. So not much training in hand for the new apparatuses that are incoming into the shop.
Yeah, that's interesting because that wasn't necessarily our experience in Massachusetts as we were working with companies with cleaners who were switching over to wet cleaning, that we were finding that the training was really critical to being able to get to the point where you had the performance that you were expecting. And I'm wondering if it's simply that this technology, this professional wet cleaning technology, is now more commonly used. I mean, it kind of sounds like that's what you're saying.
I don't know what the statistics are for cleaners specifically, or transitioning into wet cleaning, but I'm not too sure on that. But I hope it is a more common practice than traditional methods that are currently being used in the industry, because it is obviously safer because the shop essentially is a lot more traffic for the community. The employees, it really depends if you're a commercial business, but just small business like my establishment, there's only 1 or 2 employees and the owner that are working in shop. But mainly it is for the community. It's big because it's a lot of traffic. You have toddlers that come in with their moms. You have dads that come in, children. So all walks of life come in, and just having an alternative that is safer for customers and community, and that is not a toxic solvent that you're using in the shop, is a big plus.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about cost. A few people have asked about cost, and certainly that's one of the things we need to think about. And particularly for really small businesses, what were the costs associated with making these changes, and how were you able to justify that? Adam, why don't we start with you?
Thanks. For us, the cost was almost a wash, to be honest with you. When we did the analysis on what we were paying for the previous chemicals to what we arrived at, the detergent that we use actually a little cheaper, and that made up for the additional testing that we do on the sanitizers. We haven't had to invest in any additional equipment, so to speak. Mostly it's just apprising everybody who comes in as far as training them on the processes, making sure that the PPE is correct so that everybody's safe. So I think in that respect, it was easy for us.
Great. How about you, Jamie? What were the costs involved with making that switch, and how did you justify that?
So it definitely helped with the King County support. Larry Brown has been really, helpful to us and in so many ways. But I would say that, the costs for us to make, to retrofit our business to waterborne paints were our compressors, the airflow, like the curtains in our booths. And with the help of King County, like I said, it really made it possible. But as far as like now as being set up and everything done already, it's pretty comparable, the prices to the solvents that we were using before. So that's a plus. And then not only that, but like I was saying before, is that we save, I think, more that we're not wasting the materials. We're not, throwing a lot of hazardous materials away at all. I mean, it's crazy how before, as far as using solvents, how we had to call the waste disposal and quite often, and now it's really it's really changed for the better.
Mhm.
So that cost and that savings is actually, really great, because that's something that we didn't expect,
That's great. How about you, Scott?
It really depends. This is one thing that I want to touch on. It really depends on what vendors you find for your spotting agent soaps and detergents for the transition. Some vendors can be extremely expensive, but really depends on exactly what vendor you find. And one stipulation that we did encounter with the grants is that it has to be approved by the Department of Ecology, and King County does look at it as what soap, solvents, and spotting agents that you do transition to. So everything has to meet a criteria with them as well to receive the grants as well. So I think that's a plus as well, because if I were to touch on someone at the Agency of Ecology, the reception is, I would say, really high for the customers as well, because they know that they're coming into an establishment that has basically been approved by the Department of Ecology and King County Hazardous Waste Material, that everything that we're using to essentially clean the garments and materials are safe for you, and that is not toxic or corrosive or any health concerns when you're dropping your garments off as well. For the cost, it depends on what vendors you find for the transition. With the machines as well, it depends on a vendor, what kind of vendors you find, because you're essentially taking out all the equipment, decommissioning and all that. But if Jamie kind of touched on it as well, as the cost of disposing the hazardous material is extremely expensive. I think if you do refer to the chat as well, I think the representatives from King County, Kate and Steve, did touch on the cause as well. So if you can refer to the chat as well.
Yeah, no, thanks. So one thing that you have all spoken about, well, let me think. So we're hearing a lot about working with King County, working with the Toxic Waste Reduction Institute to help you in this process. And I think, Jamie, it was you who said that your vendor told you about the opportunity to work with King County. How did each of you connect with your technical service provider, and how did you, and how, what kind of funding support did they provide? I know it's in the chat, but let's talk about it as well. So Jamie, it was your vendor who turned you on to King County, is that right?
Yeah, so after we found out where we were locating to, and we talked about making a switch over to waterborne, he was telling me that there was a program available through King County. We had to apply for it and be approved, but that was kind of like a deal breaker as well, for us to, because again, we were spending so much money in equipment and everything that to afford to really try to have the extra funds to make the transition would have been difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually, it was perfect. It was perfect that the rebates that we received through the program
Mm-hmm.
were great.
Mm-hmm. And Adam, you talked a bit about how we got connected. You want to just kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. We honestly connected through, I'll just call it proximity. The fact that Joy and I are neighbors. I think that was a good lead in to bring awareness for us, certainly on the brewing side, to what you folks do.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that small breweries were on Touri's list as an industry to started digging into to find out exactly what we were doing.
Right.
That made for a good introduction.
Great. And Scott?
Mm-hmm. Steve actually came to our shop. I don't know if there are certain ledgers that are kept with the county stating that, well, yes, they are actually stating that certain shops are still currently using perchloroethylene or PERC within the county. So Steve did come out to the shop and approach us that, hey, we have this program available. And basically he gave us the whole spiel about this is a great alternative, you should take advantage of it, but at the same time a bit apprehensive because it is new technology and I haven't really heard of it. But it was basically all Steve that did the legwork and came out and basically introduced himself, the program, the processes, and how everything works. So that's how.
Yeah. Yeah, and so getting the attention of other small businesses about the possibilities is part of our opportunity here as practitioners. You know, how do we get in touch with, how do we identify companies that we can work with, and how can we help to support? And both Torrey and King County have been incredibly fortunate in that we have grant funding that we could offer to companies to help them in making this change. And that's, you know, pretty rare, I think, and certainly something that we would like to make more. So the driver for making change really matters. I would like to revisit that question about drivers, but first, I wonder if there are trade associations that any of you work with or are aware of that can be instrumental in getting the word out there about the advantages of making the kinds of changes that you each have talked about. Do any of you have a trade association that you're involved with or work with in any way? Adam, I think, yeah, you might.
Yeah, we're involved with the Massachusetts State Brewers Guild and have actually presented at a quarterly meeting with Joy on the work that we've all done. Our guild is very active and does a great job of sharing information to the roughly 200 breweries here in Mass.
So that's really helpful. So not only are you able to kind of work with Torrey to get to a point where you are feeling really comfortable with a process that is not the norm, but you're able to share that information, get it out there. In Massachusetts, we also have a couple of dry cleaning trade associations that have been kind of unevenly supportive of the change to wet cleaning. I don't know, Scott, if you've had any other kind of groups that you've been able to share your experience with.
There are different associations here as well for the community and industry that people are involved in, that I'm involved in. So if that is an avenue for the local agencies to reach out to see whether they are willing or able to transition into a more environmentally sound alternative, that would be one. But personally, no, I'm not involved with any kind of association at this time.
Okay.
But there are groups available and associations within the community as well, like you do have in Massachusetts.
Right. So what I'd like to ask each of you is just, what advice do you have for your for other small businesses like yours, but also for technical assistance providers like the people who are joining us today? What advice do you have? Like, what are your needs? What were the needs that were met or that you learned you needed to address as you went through your process of changing? What advice would you have for companies doing it, or for organizations like Torrey or King County who would like to support you in making those kinds of changes? Adam, you want to start? Since you're on mute.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, being aware that the other side exists. You know, it's lucky for us that we landed the brewery here in Lowell, which is where UMass Lowell happens to be, where the Toury office is. Finding out what local resources you do have available is huge, because as a small business owner, yeah, I used to work in big companies where you realize there was an entire department for whatever it was, and now you're just like, oh, that's me too. Realizing that there's a group of folks out there like Toury who can help with investigations. They can do some legwork on finding out what's available in the industry. That was very helpful.
Yeah, great. Jamie, what about you? Any advice for other auto body shops, or for the people on this, joining us on this discussion? What do you need? What works for you?
Well, I think that, in my industry, speaking for my, for my industry, is that there's only about really 5 major paint companies that we have to deal with. And the way that I did, find out about it was through the paint rep. And then I've also talked to other paint reps from different companies, and they were, one of them wasn't aware, and then the other ones were aware. I've also talked to shop owners and told them to have their paint company or whoever they deal with look into it, because it doesn't, it did exist for us, and they might be able to tap into that. But I would suggest that just maybe going for the paint companies and really trying to promote it, and give them that incentive, definitely, because I mean, everybody that opens a shop or has an existing shop has to deal with their, that paint vendor that they, decide to go with. So, I mean, if there's only 5 available, I think it would be pretty easy. And what's been going on, to me, seems like it's been working as well.
Scott, how about you? Any reflections on what you've learned that you think we all need to hear?
I would say majority of the people in the industry might need some more technical assistance as well, because maybe English is their second language, and there might be a barrier when approached with a program such as Steve and their agency or Ecology approaches them with. And there might be some apprehensions as well, because it is new technology. And if I would say they had a little better understanding of costs as well, that they will be saving in the long term, and just the big idea of that it is more environmentally sound and healthier for them, and is a safer alternative. So if there is a better awareness as well for the community and industry that I am currently in as well, I think that would be a great deal for them as well, for them to completely understand the scope of the transition and how positive it is.
Right. Thank you all. So it's so interesting to hear your perspectives on the process, and I have all these different things circled that I wanted to get to, and we may get to that, but I want to leave some time to just hear from Toury and from King County, and just a little bit of a reflection on what you've heard so far and what you might want to add. So I'm going to invite Joy and Steve to join us. And Joy, maybe you can start. And thank you all for so much good sharing of resources and response to the questions in the chat. So I've actually had to not pay attention because there's so much going on. So I appreciate that. But Joy, you want to kind of just give us some of your thoughts based on what you've heard?
Sure. Hi, Pam, thanks. And yeah, so just listening to the panel, I think that one of the biggest takeaways from this group of presentations is that what's a big key to success for assistance programs is finding the champions, which is what you've seen today. People who speak highly of the assistance programs, speak highly of the change, speak eloquently about the process, and can teach others about what their experience was and get down to the nitty-gritty. of what they were able to do. So I think that's huge. I think Turi capitalized on that with dry cleaning program, auto shop programs, now food and beverage programs. And through that, we've developed case studies, videos, as well as putting on demonstration events live when we're not quarantined, virtually when we are. And that, I guess, leads to my second point, is that from my perspective, it seems that folks in the very small businesses learn well from their peers, and find that the advice is worth taking from those who are encountering the same issues, not necessarily from me, who isn't a dry cleaner or a mechanic or whatever. So that's very helpful with putting that information in the case studies and the videos, et cetera, and the demo sites. Making the transition as simple and smooth and easy as possible for the small business helps. As it's been said, they wear so many hats. Making the transition simple and easy is key. Obviously, having a grant program helps when you have money to give as a hook to get small businesses engaged is very helpful. And there was a little bit of chatter about vendors and trade associations. And I guess that would probably fit in the category of lessons learned for me, that yeah, there's a lot of vendors and trade associations that are helpful, but I feel like you kind of want to go in with a little dose of skepticism and working with any of them. Since the vendors are there to sell whatever products, whether it's wet cleaning, detergents, or perk, because some of them sell both. And also whether or not they fully support the concept of transitioning to alternative methodologies or alternative materials. I've had the experience of trade associations literally being encouraging and supportive to me, and turning around and being saying disparaging remarks to their members literally in the next sentence. So I just suggest being careful and keeping that in mind as you work with and engage with the vendors and the trade associations. Although we do also have, champions that are vendors and trade associations as well. It's just helpful to be a little bit careful there. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, really, really good points, Joy. Thanks. How about you, Steve? What would you like to just reflect on based on what we've heard?
Well, thanks very much. I mean, I think one thing that I'm really taking away from this is how much of a leap of faith the small business owners are taking, trusting, a government program to persuade them to move to what we consider to be a safer alternative. Because we have to remember, so if you take dry cleaning, for example, they're not like Boeing, where we're trying to get them to find a better way to make a widget. A lot of small businesses have a single process that they're using to deliver a service or a product to a customer. And if something goes wrong, and if they make the wrong choice, if it's Jamie, providing a finish on a vehicle that isn't, up to customer expectations, and similarly, if Scott is, cleaning a wool suit or a wedding dress and it ends up being ruined, we have to remember that in those situations, customers have choices. They have other places they can go. And so I think, what's really important for government programs is to really understand the industry, understand what the pressures are, and understand what the barriers are to them potentially changing. And there are a number of ways you can do that. I mean, if we take the dry cleaning industry, for example, in King County, over 80% of our businesses are owned and operated by people of Korean ancestry. And so figuring out ways to gain the trust of that industry and providing them with good information so that they can make good choices for their businesses is absolutely crucial. And in our King County program, we always say that we lead with race, and that all the work we do is centered in equity and social justice. And what that means is working with our communities to make sure that they're part of the process. And so we spent a lot of time engaging the community. And in fact, it's a shame that we no longer have a Korean Dry Cleaners Association locally, but we did things like rent out restaurants on a Saturday night and invited 60 dry cleaners to dinner. And that was our opportunity to essentially do focus groups and really learn about the industry. We also found that as we're developing promotional materials and so on and so forth, it was vitally important to include the community in the development of those materials, because, you know, I'm not immersed in Korean culture, and we know that there are images and colors and so on and so forth that have special meaning in community. So again, you know, it's really important, especially working with these minority-owned businesses, to involve them in the process. And Joy did touch on some of the issues with vendors, and they're very well taken. But what we have found locally is having the vendor community as our agents, if you like, to promote our programs has been extraordinarily effective. And in our local community, the majority of vendors to the dry cleaning community are Korean American. And so we were able to work with them to sort of finally hone our messaging, and have them as our primary interface with the community. And likewise, Larry Brown, you know, with the waterborne painting project, you know, worked very closely with the vendor community, because again, we felt that they were the trusted voices in the industry. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of lessons learned. Our program's been providing this sort of service for over 20 years, but it's only recently that it's culminated in our ability to, you know, provide significant funding of $20,000 per business to promote this work. But, you know, there's an awful lot of background that, you know, went on behind the scenes before we started these programs. So it's really important, as you know, Pam, as a leader in this field, that you and your staff really understand the industry, they gain the trust of the industry, that they actually become, as much as they can, experts in the process itself, because you can't expect a small business owner to make a change if you can't answer their questions. And if you can't answer their specific question, be honest and say you don't know. I'm going to go check and get back with you. So, you know, we had the advantage with the dry cleaning program that Turi had already instituted some incentive programs. You had, you know, developed a lot of literature and background that we were able to leverage. The California Air Resources Board had started to phase out PERC dry cleaning. And so we had access to a lot of expertise, both nationally and locally, that we could draw upon. With the waterborne paint project, this was an idea that Larry Brown started, and we realized that we didn't really know too much about the industry. So we actually did a full-on alternatives assessment to really understand the pros and cons of waterborne versus solvent-borne paints. And, you know, I think one of the best things that we were able to do, we actually went into shops and did, you know, full shift air exposure monitoring in shops that were using waterborne versus solvent-borne paints. So not only could we understand what was going on with the relative hazard of the products, but we could understand exposure. But we also took the opportunity when we were in the shops to, you know, spend time with the painters and the bodymen, again, to like learn about their industry and what the challenges and barriers are. And all of that ultimately went into the program that we developed. And because we had so much good background technical information, we were able to go to our leaders and convince them that we should use our resources, you know, $20,000 per shop to implement these programs. So,
you know, yeah, I'm sorry, no, but that just raises, I think, an important point from your perspective, which is, you know, how do you convince the decision makers that the investment of time and money that that our agencies put into these projects reap enough of a reward that it makes good sense, that it's a good investment, because clearly we'd like to see more of this happening. So how do we convince them that this is a valuable investment? It makes good sense.
Well, in King County, we're very fortunate that we have very progressive leadership, and our ultimate authority for our program is the King County Board of Health. And we were very fortunate that the then chair of the King County Board of Health came to our director and says, I would like your program to do something big. And I would like you to do something that addresses, carcinogens. And so, we testified to the King County Board of Health about safer alternatives in general, and the proposal to develop this program for dry cleaning as a proof of concept. And it was unanimously approved by the King County Board of Health. And so that was huge for us, because we had political pressure from the highest levels of our county, encouraging us to do this work. And I recognize that not everybody has that advantage, and not everybody has the luxury of the fee structure that we have. Our funding comes from fees that are levied on utility bills, wastewater treatment, and so on and so forth. So we have a relatively large fund available to us that not only funds our program, but allows us to have funds set aside for these sorts of financial incentives. And I recognize that's a very unique situation, and we're very privileged. The challenge then becomes, well, what industry are you going to focus on next?
Right. Yeah. Joy, how would you respond to that?
Oh, I was just going to build on a little piece of that. I think at Turry, a while back, there was a community program and an industry program. And there was a need to find a space between that focused on the actual small businesses. So the community program supported and educated community groups that may have worked with small businesses, but the assistance went to the community group that was assisting the small business, and industry program helped the larger industries. So the Turry Small Business Program was created to directly assist the small businesses through grants and other technical assistance to meet that space, or to fill that space in between. So, and then essentially doing pilot programs to demonstrate and showcase how there was a need, how money could be saved, how there was an openness and a willingness of the small business owners to make the change, all came from that.
Yeah, great. So Molly, I think it would be great if we could kind of shift this so that we can invite others who are joining us today to ask their questions directly. I don't know if you need to unpin people, but I would love to invite Larry Brown to speak to us a bit about your experience with the auto body shops, and if you have any other particular issues that you kind of wanted to raise. I know that King County has really championed a focus on working with environmental justice opportunities and environmental justice communities. So Larry, if you're able to unmute yourself and share your screen, it would be great to hear a little bit from you.
Hello, can you see me and everything?
There you are, yes.
Here I am. So excuse the bandage on my forehead. So I had some skin cancer removed yesterday.
Oh goodness.
So we've been talking about carcinogens and stuff, and so sun can be a carcinogen, and as well as chemicals. So so I'm probably not my normal self with a big bandage, but anyway, in terms of talking about the auto body industry, like I think Steve was alluding to, things don't happen necessarily overnight, So way back at about 2011, I I recruited an intern from the University of Washington, and we were wanting to decide, okay, what industry can we start working with or related to safer alternatives? And the program had a history of working with auto body shops since the program began in the early 1990s, but it was more hazardous waste focused and that kind of thing. And now we really wanted to look at safer alternatives. And so we went out and interviewed auto body shops to get feedbacks of what they thought about just safer alternatives in general, you know. And that was when we first discovered that, at least within that industry, they placed a lot of importance on their vendors for information, for the paint reps. And Jamie alluded to that, where the vendors are important parts. So when we finally started the project that we're talking about now of really helping switch these shops to waterborne, we decided that the vendors should be a really important part of that, since a lot of trust is placed on the vendors by the industry. And so they were one of our big marketers. You know, we decided to have them get the word out for the most part to the industry, because those are the folks that the shops will trust probably more than a government official. And so that's the approach that we took. But you know, there was a lot of interviewing. I mean, the one thing is just simple things like not even knowing how many auto body shops in King County are already using waterborne when we first started off. You know, simple data things like that. You know, if 95% of the shops are already using waterborne, which we knew wasn't the case, but okay, is there really a need to start a project, you know, related to it? So we virtually called up every auto body shop in King County, because no one had an overall view of this kind of data. You know, each paint rep knew their clientele, but no one had a full picture. So just gaining information like that to decide to really start. And then definitely Steve, and I put the link to our alternatives assessment within the chat. We wanted to make sure that from a performance, cost, availability, hazard, exposure, waste management, community impacts, that we were really feeling like the waterborne was a safer and a better alternative to solvent, high VOC solvent borne. And so we supported our decision to invest money in this industry based on our alternatives assessment.
Right, thank you. So I'm wondering if anybody else listening in would like to ask their question directly. I know we've had a lot of questions going on in the chat, a lot of resources being shared, as you mentioned, Larry. So I kind of want to open it up to others. This is what you would call a pregnant pause. Let me fill it in, which is not something I normally like to do. But
I think Jen Jackson has her hand up. So does Joel.
Good. I didn't see that. Great, Jen. Why don't you go ahead and share?
Hi. Thanks so much. This has been a really interesting and fun panel. I have a question for Scott about the dry cleaning chemicals. So in California, we have a law that is pushing a lot of dry cleaners to move to other solvents. And I'm curious what your experience was if you had other kinds of vendors coming to you, trying to encourage you to move to hydrocarbon solvents or other solvents like, I think it's D5, and what they were saying to you. I'm just curious what they were telling you, and then what led you to choose wet cleaning over some of these other options.
That was the most difficult part. I wasn't, that was basically the due diligence that I had to do on my end to figure out which solvents and soaps and spotting agents that I was going to choose to transition into wet cleaning. That essentially because, like I touched on, that there is a criteria that upon me receiving the grants, all these solvents, spotting agents and such, etc., have to be approved by them as well, saying, hey, these are approved, non-toxic, you're good to go. So that was the most difficult part. I wasn't approached by any vendors saying, hey, we have this available, why don't you try this? So yeah, that wasn't
So before you made the transition to wet cleaning, though, you weren't approached by other types of solvent vendors before that?
no,
Okay,
not at all.
thank you.
And it kind of
absolutely.
raises the question too, which is how do you understand what your options are? And it really kind of relies on us to present them, I think. Yeah, great question, Jen. Joel, did you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, I guess there's a question. Well, there's a question from Hiram from Belgium, who we've worked with on substitution. He works a lot with companies about, whether these programs need to be close to the businesses or relatively located. But I'm going to ask a broader question, which is, this is wonderful work, and there's only a few models like this out there. So how do we duplicate these models? How do we sort of gain sustainable resources to do this? Massachusetts has it because we have a law that mandates and provides funding for it. So, would greater sort of funding for governments to support small companies in making these transitions be helpful? And where do we find it?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the question that I was asking both Steve and Joy, which is how do we make the case for making that money, using what money exists in this particular way?
Yeah, well, this is a good question for our panelists too, is to what degree are you able to sort of work with King County or work with Tory and go out there and advocate for additional funding because you see the benefits of this? Because ultimately, if small businesses are saying we really want this, governments tend to listen to small businesses. So I'm just trying to think of how do we advocate for more so we can multiply the effect of these, because ultimately you're doing it and the help, you've seen the value of the support.
Yeah, really good point. Thoughts?
So obviously for me, it was a huge burden to rid ourselves with perchloroethylene perc because it is corrosive, it's toxic, it's hazardous to your health, the community. We have a lot, like I keep emphasizing it because we have schools around us as well. So, I mean, if this is a case study that they can take and to advocate to government institutions saying, hey, this works and it is safe for our community and there is not a better alternative. So we do need funding for such programs. I feel like it's a no-brainer. It's an obvious decision for anyone who is trying to implement the same programs in any kind of situation. So.
Yeah, so sharing that information. Jamie, do you have thoughts on this? Like, how to get out there and get more support for this kind of work that you've been able to do with King County?
Say again, I'm sorry.
So the question is, how do we get the attention of lawmakers to help support more work like this? And Joel makes, I think, a very great point, which is that certainly in the United States, lawmakers pay a lot more attention to small businesses than they do to their agency people. So, what do you think? What are your thoughts on how we might get their attention and get them to start thinking about making the kinds of investments that King County made in your business, that Turi made in Adam's business?
Wow, I mean, I would say the testimony of the small business owners. I mean, like what we're doing right now, and to the proofs in the pudding, pretty much. I mean that and I don't mind helping Larry Brown out when he asks me, for anything, any feedback or any surveys or for this, for example, because I really appreciate everything that was done for us. So I mean, I think the testimony, I mean, showing that, you know, that it does make a difference, and letting them know that it does make a difference from us would probably be the greatest. I mean,
Yeah.
if there's any kind of survey or like a something that we can be provided with to fill out to show them that, you know, these are impactful changes and, you know, things that are happening.
Yeah, interesting point. Steve, did you have a thought on that? I know you had your hand raised.
Let me. So let's see. I think it's, again, just like really important to continue, you know, the dialogue with the industry to make sure that they're aware of what the latest, you know, alternatives are.
Yeah.
You know, it's really important to share not only, you know, what the advantages are of moving to the particular technology, but as, you know, Jamie has said, you know, in addition to moving to waterborne paints, he also had to invest in different drying systems that cost, you know, additional funds. And likewise for Scott, you know, beyond just, you know, purchasing a professional wet cleaning system, he, you know, also has to think about the ancillary equipment that's needed, like the pressing equipment as well. So I just think it's really important to be upfront with, you know, our communities about the hidden costs and the fact that adopting new technologies, you know, they are going to sometimes run into snags, and there will be downtime. And especially for an auto body shop or a dry cleaner, that's absolutely critical. So I think then it's incumbent on us to make sure that the shops have the technical support they need, you know, to the extent that we can do that, we do. But we also put a lot of pressure on the vendors as well to make sure that they're providing the service.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot going on. So I wanted to just point out, Georgine made a really good point, which is that when we think about what is the cost of the process of change, that we should be tying in the costs associated with the waste being generated, both treating the hazardous waste and what the environmental costs of potentially releasing something like PERC into the environment would be. So really looking at the big picture when thinking about the costs will be helpful in making the case to our decision makers to try to get their attention. I just want to kind of, I guess what I'll do at this point is sort of wrap up and then ask panels for any final thoughts. But you know, there's so much involved with a small business, and really, what I'm hearing is that it boils down to a couple of things. That we as technical assistance providers, as alternatives assessment practitioners, need to really understand the process, you know, well. And, you know, I heard, I think Larry say that, you know, going through the effort of doing an analysis of alternatives helps you to really understand that. So understanding the process first is so important. Building trust with the companies that we want to do work with, and then identifying champions like our panelists, is those steps are so key to getting to a successful implementation. And then sharing the results of what you've experienced, so that we can get the word out and get more companies like yours to make the kinds of changes you've made that have led to really positive impacts on your business. So it's a very holistic approach, and it's so interesting and so pragmatic. I'd love to hear just any final thoughts from the three of you on what you have heard, what we've talked about, just any closing thoughts for this audience. Adam, why don't you start?
Overall, I mean, this is a great experience. I think anybody out there running a business, if you become aware of these support organizations, take advantage of it. We all have things that we're strong in, areas that we're very good and knowledgeable about, and then there's the vast sea of things that we don't know our ear from our elbow about. And this has gone a long way towards helping me figure out how to manage the short term and thinking down the road a ways. The sustainability side of this is, as our business grows, are we taking the right steps now to make sure that we're not going to have to invest in a ton of equipment to remediate things down the road? So take advantage of the resources that you can find.
Wonderful. Thank you. Scott, how about you? Final thoughts?
I'm just happy that I could be here and share my story as well. And I hope it inspires everyone here that we are basically living testimonials, like Jamie said, that these programs work and that it does help us tremendously as a small business, because we are transitioning into a more environmentally friendly way as well. And it's just the benefits exceed the cons in every aspect, I believe, at least in my industry, because of how much we engage in with our community as well. So if there's any way that, that this program can regenerate itself to other industries and different avenues, I see it as a great success. And I do appreciate Steve over at King County as well for this tremendous opportunity as well.
Great, thank you. How about you, Jamie? Final thoughts?
Well, I agree with Scott and Adam. I mean, it was super helpful to have the support there. And for a small business, it's one of the toughest things I've ever encountered. I mean, as far as like the work that we have to put into everything, along with the sacrifices that we have to make financially, especially. And this definitely helped really jumpstart and help us. And I'm sure it helped the other individuals as well. And so, yeah, if anything that I can do in the future to help promote this, I'll totally be willing and able to do that for you. And I appreciate this, and this was enlightening as well.
That's great. Well, you guys have each been really terrific in opening our eyes to the issues associated with, helping small businesses really move towards safer choices. You've done such a great job, and you are clearly champions. So I'm sure I speak for everyone. They just really, really appreciate your time. Hiram, I see you have your hand up, but Molly or Joel, I'm going to let you guys wrap this up, and you can I'll let you manage that. So, but thank you from my heart. You've all done just such a wonderful job. Really appreciate it. And also Steve and Joy, your feedback's been great. Thank you.
I just want to also say thank you to all of you for presenting today your experiences. I think we have a lot to learn from your great efforts and your challenges, your successes, and of course to the two technical assistance teams that have been just wonderfully supportive of industry. And for those who weren't able to ask questions, just reach out to either of the teams. I know they'll be happy to work with you, answer any questions. So with that, thank you again to our sponsors. Thank you to all of you for spending the day with us. Thanks, everyone.